You know what nobody tells you? That sometimes the hardest thing you'll do all day is just be, not accomplish anything, not solve a problem, just exist in your own skin, in your own mind, in the room you're sitting in right now. And when people ask what's wrong, you can't even explain it because nothing happened. That's the whole point. Nothing happened, and somehow you're exhausted. This moment happens more often than you'd think. You're sitting there, maybe scrolling your phone or staring at the wall, and someone texts asking if you want to grab coffee. Your body physically tenses, not because coffee sounds bad, but because the idea of putting on clothes, getting in the car, making your face do the right things, holding up your end of a conversation, it feels like being asked to run a marathon when you're not sure you can make it to the kitchen. And here's where it gets confusing. You might have done harder things that same week. Maybe you gave a presentation at work. Maybe you dealt with a difficult family situation. Maybe you managed a genuine crisis without falling apart. But now, on a random Wednesday afternoon, the thought of existing in front of another human being feels impossible. How does that make sense? It doesn't, if you're trying to logic your way through it. But your nervous system isn't running on logic. It's running on a budget, and sometimes that budget runs out in ways that don't match the receipts. You can handle the big, obvious stressors because they give you something to push against. There's adrenaline. There's a clear problem with a clear endpoint. But just existing? That's constant. There's no finish line to existing. You don't get to clock out of being conscious. Think about what you're actually doing when you're just existing. You're processing sensory input every single second. The hum of the refrigerator, the texture of your shirt, the quality of light in the room, and your brain is filtering thousands of pieces of information, most of which you're not even aware of, and deciding what to do with them. You're maintaining a sense of self, keeping track of who you are, what you think, what you're worried about, and what you're hoping for. You're navigating the space between what's happening inside you and what's happening outside you, and that border, it's not as solid as we like to pretend. Now add to that everything you're carrying. Not just today's worries, but the ones from last week that never really resolved, the conversation you keep replaying, the decision you haven't made, the thing you need to do that, and you keep not doing, which means you're also carrying the guilt about not doing it. The awareness that you should feel different than you do, and that other people seem to handle this better. You're not just existing, you're existing while holding all of that and pretending you're not. So when someone asks why you're tired, what are you supposed to say? I'm tired from the full-time job of being myself. That sounds dramatic. But is it wrong? Here's what makes this particularly cruel. When existing feels like too much, you often respond by trying to disappear. Not literally, but you cancel plans. You stop answering texts. You make yourself smaller and quieter because the only thing that feels manageable is taking up less space. And then, because you're human, you feel guilty about that too. You feel like you're failing at something everyone else does automatically. You start wondering what's wrong with you that such a basic thing like just being here feels so heavy. But notice what you're doing when you think that way. You're treating your exhaustion like a moral failure, like you're supposed to have infinite capacity for consciousness, like there's a right amount of energy to have, and you're falling short. But who decided that? When did we agree that you should be able to run at full capacity all the time? With no maintenance, no rest, or no periods where your system just needs to not be asked for anything? You wouldn't judge your phone for needing to charge. You wouldn't look at a plant that needs water and think it's being dramatic. But somehow you're supposed to be perpetually available to the demands of existence without ever needing to power down. And here's the thing, people don't want to say out loud. Sometimes you're not recovering from anything specific. Sometimes you're just depleted from the accumulated weight of being a conscious person in a world that never stops asking things of you. Like your attention, your reaction, your opinion, your performance, and your okayness. Let me ask you something, and I want you to actually think about it. When was the last time you existed without performing? Without managing how you come across? Without some part of your mind monitoring whether you're doing this right? Even alone, you might catch yourself thinking about how you'd explain what you're doing if someone could see you, or judging yourself through imagined eyes. There's almost no moment where you're free from the weight of being perceived, even if you're the only one doing the perceiving. That's exhausting, not occasionally, constantly. The worst part is how isolating it is, because when you try to explain this to someone, they often want to fix it, and you hear things like, "Have you tried exercise?" or "You should get out more." And those aren't bad suggestions exactly, but they miss the point. You're not looking for solutions to a problem. You're trying to be understood about something that doesn't make sense in the language we usually use to talk about struggle, because struggle is supposed to look like something. It's supposed to have a source, a story, or a reason. You can say, I'm struggling because of that happened and now I feel like this. But this is more like, I'm struggling because I am, and that's somehow enough to be overwhelming. And this doesn't make a good story. It just makes you feel broken. But what if you're not broken? What if your system is just doing exactly what systems do when they're overtaxed? They conserve, they shut down non-essential functions, and they stop pretending they have more to give than they do. Think about it this way. You know that feeling when you've been around people all day, even people you love, and you finally get home and close the door and just feel relief? That's not relief from something bad. That's relief from the effort of existing in relation to other people, the effort of being witnessed. And if that effort is noticeable after just one day, what do you think months or years of it do? You become tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Here's the micro-truth that's hard to swallow. You might be protecting something that doesn't need protection anymore. Your exhaustion might have started as a reasonable response to actual overwhelm, but at some point it became its own kind of safety. Because if existing feels like too much, you have a reason to not try. You have a reason to stay small. You have permission to not show up fully to your own life. And some part of you might be holding on to that permission because living without it feels even scarier. I'm not saying you're choosing this, but I am saying that sometimes our protections become our prisons, and we don't notice when the lock is on our side of the door. So what do you do with this? Because I'm not going to tell you to just push through it or think positive or remember that other people have it worse. That's not helpful, and it's not true to what you're experiencing. Start smaller than you think you need to, and I mean much smaller. If existing feels like too much, don't try to exist better. Just try to exist with slightly less judgment about how you're doing it. Can you sit in your exhaustion without also beating yourself up for being exhausted? Can you cancel plans without writing a story about what that means about you as a person? Sometimes the first step isn't doing more. It's releasing the demand that you should be doing more. And maybe, when you're ready, you ask yourself, what would it feel like to take up space without apologizing for it? Not performing, not managing, just being here, in whatever state you're in, without trying to make it sense to anyone, including yourself. Because existing isn't a test you're supposed to pass. It's just what you're doing, right now, as you watching this. And the fact that it sometimes feels like too much doesn't make you weak. It makes you honest about something most people are too tired to admit. You're here. That's enough. Even when it doesn't feel like it, especially then. Remember that you are very important, and that physical and mental rest is an act of self-care and self-love, and you deserve it. If you feel you need to, talk to someone about it or seek professional help. Feel free to share your feelings in the comments. This can serve as inspiration and support for others. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of content that actually explains what's happening instead of just telling you to do better. See you next time.